the story starts with a plan to surprise my wife, Megan, for her birthday with a trip she had always dreamed of, a cruise vacation. We'd been married for almost a decade, and though life had its ups and downs, I believed we were still solid. I remember the look on her face when I gave her the tickets. Her eyes lit up with a joy I hadn't seen in a while, and I felt a small wave of relief wash over me. It felt like this trip could be exactly what we needed, a chance to rekindle our bond. The first day on the cruise ship was magical. We explored the decks, sipped cocktails by the pool, and laughed like we used to. Megan seemed relaxed, more at ease than I'd seen her in months. Maybe this was what she needed, what we both needed. That night, we had dinner at the ship's finest restaurant, the kind where they dim the lights, and the soft music plays in the background. Everything felt perfect, like we were in a movie. But as the days went on, I noticed small things. Megan was often distracted, her phone buzzing more than usual. She'd smile at the screen, then quickly put it away when she saw me glance over. I told myself I was being paranoid. We were on vacation, and she was probably just excited, texting her friends about the amazing time we were having. On the third day, the ship docked at a beautiful island for an excursion. We had planned to go snorkeling together, but at the last minute, Megan claimed she wasn't feeling well. She urged me to go without her, insisting that she just needed a bit of rest. Reluctantly, I agreed, giving her a kiss on the forehead before heading out. Snorkeling was incredible, but my mind kept drifting back to Megan. Something felt off, like an itch I couldn't scratch. When I returned to the ship a few hours later, I headed straight to our room. I expected to find her there, maybe watching TV or napping. Instead, the room was empty. Her purse was gone, and so was her phone. I decided to look around the ship, figuring she might have felt better and gone to the spa or the bar. As I passed by the lounge area, I spotted her. She was sitting in a corner booth, laughing, but not alone. There was a man with her, someone I didn't recognize. He was leaning in close, and they seemed completely absorbed in their conversation. My heart dropped. I froze, unable to move, just watching them. Megan hadn't noticed me yet. The man reached across the table and touched her hand, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in closer, her smile widening in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was like I was invisible, a ghost watching my own life unravel. I didn't confront her then. I walked away, feeling like the walls of the ship were closing in on me. I needed air. I went up to the top deck and just stood there, staring out at the endless ocean, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Was this just a friendly conversation? Was I overreacting? That night, I decided to confront her. When I returned to our room, Megan was already there, lying on the bed with a glass of wine. She looked up and gave me a lazy smile. "Did you have a good time?" she asked, her voice light and casual, as if nothing had happened. "Who was that guy you were with?" I blurted out, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "What guy?" "Oh, you mean the bartender? He was just chatting with me while I waited for you." "Nothing to worry about." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But something in her eyes gave her away, a flicker of something I hadn't seen before, guilt, maybe, or fear. I dropped it for the night, telling myself I was imagining things. I didn't want to ruin the trip. Not yet. The next day, we had a couple's massage scheduled. Megan seemed distant, her responses clipped and her smile forced. I tried to shake off the nagging feeling, but it kept growing, like a storm brewing just beneath the surface. After the massage, she said she needed to take a nap. I watched her head back to the room, and instead of following her, I decided to linger for a bit. I had to clear my head. I walked around the ship, ending up at the small cafe on the lower deck. And there he was again. The same man from before, sitting alone, typing something on his phone. It was probably a coincidence, but I couldn't shake the suspicion gnawing at my gut. Without thinking, I walked over to him. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, looking up with a friendly smile that didn't reach his eyes. I've seen you with my wife, I said, keeping my voice low but firm. His smile faded. For a moment, he looked like he was about to deny it, but then he leaned back in his chair, a look of realization washing over his face. So, you're the husband, he said softly. What is that supposed to mean? My pulse was racing now, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. He shrugged, not meeting my gaze. Look, I don't want any trouble. She told me things were complicated between you two. What? I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What the hell are you talking about? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Maybe you should talk to her. I didn't know she was still with you. She said you were separated. I turned on my heel and stormed back to the room. The door slammed open, and there was Megan, sitting on the bed, her eyes wide with surprise. We need to talk, I said, my voice shaking. She didn't deny it. Instead, she broke down in tears, confessing everything. The cruise wasn't just a birthday gift to her, it was supposed to be a fresh start, a way to see if there was still something left between us. But she had met this guy months ago, and things had escalated quickly. She thought she could keep it a secret, but the guilt had been eating her alive. I felt numb, like I was outside my own body, watching a nightmare unfold. We spent the rest of the trip in silence, the beautiful ocean views marred by the wreckage of our marriage. I had wanted to give her the world, but instead, I found out I had lost it all. When I confronted her that night, Megan broke down. Her tears felt real, and for a moment, I saw the woman I'd loved for all these years, not the stranger she'd become. She apologized profusely, her voice thick with emotion. She said she loved me, that she had made a mistake, a terrible lapse in judgment. It wasn't what it looked like, she swore. The man from the cafe was just someone she'd met during a rough patch. It was never supposed to mean anything, she claimed, and it certainly wasn't supposed to go this far. I wanted to believe her. I looked into her eyes and saw the same woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. In her desperation, she grabbed my hands and pleaded, saying that she still loved me, that this trip was her way of trying to make things right. The sincerity in her voice cracked something inside me, and against my better judgment, I chose to forgive her. I told myself that everyone makes mistakes, that maybe this was just a wake-up call for both of us. I wrapped my arms around her, and she sobbed into my chest, whispering apologies between breaths. That night, we lay in bed together, her head resting on my shoulder, the rhythmic sound of the ship's engine lulling us into a fragile peace. I felt her relax against me, her breathing evening out as she drifted into sleep. I tried to close my eyes, willing myself to let go of the doubts gnawing at the edges of my mind. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe this was just a terrible mistake, a moment of weakness she regretted. But deep down, something didn't feel right. There was a tension in the air, like the calm before a storm, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. 2 days passed in a blur of forced smiles and hollow laughter. We went through the motions of enjoying the cruise, lounging by the pool, dining in the fancy restaurants, and even dancing one night under the stars. Megan was trying, I could tell. She held my hand, leaned in for kisses, and acted like everything was fine. But there was a distance in her eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't place. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just the remnants of my own paranoia. But the doubts lingered, poisoning every moment of what should have been a beautiful vacation. On the second night after our confrontation, I woke up alone. The bed beside me was cold, and the room was filled with the low hum of the ship cutting through the dark sea. I rubbed my eyes, disoriented, and looked around. Megan's side of the bed was empty, the sheets rumpled and pushed aside. I glanced at the clock, it was 2:30 in the morning. Where could she be at this hour? I got up, the chill of the air conditioning biting into my skin as I slipped on a t-shirt. I told myself she was probably just in the bathroom or maybe couldn't sleep and decided to take a walk. But as I opened the door to the small ensuite bathroom, I was met with silence and darkness. She wasn't there. A knot of unease tightened in my chest. I stepped out of the room, the hallway dimly lit by emergency lights. The ship was quiet, most passengers asleep at this hour. I made my way toward the lounge area, my footsteps echoing on the plush carpet. The quietness of the ship felt oppressive, like a weight pressing down on me. I had almost convinced myself to head back to the room when I heard a sound coming from one of the public restrooms further down the hall. I approached slowly, the sound growing clearer. It was Megan's voice. But she wasn't alone. I could hear her giggling, a light, flirtatious laugh I hadn't heard in years. My heart pounded as I edged closer, trying to make out her words. She was speaking softly, her tone dripping with a playfulness I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. The door to the women's restroom was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could see her. Megan was leaning against the sink, her hair tousled, and she was half-dressed, wearing only her lacy bra and a pair of shorts. In her hand, she held her phone, angled up toward her face, the screen illuminating her features. She was on a video call. I couldn't see who she was talking to, but the way she was smiling, biting her lip, and laughing softly told me everything I needed to know. She was flirting, openly, shamelessly. I could barely hear the voice on the other end of the call, but it was unmistakably male, low and husky. My stomach turned as I realized what was happening. They were having phone sex. Megan tilted her head, her free hand trailing down her chest slowly, teasingly. "You like that?" she whispered, her voice husky and seductive. "I've been thinking about you all day." I couldn't wait to sneak away. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The breath left my lungs in a rush, and I stumbled back, gripping the wall to steady myself. This couldn't be real. I had just forgiven her. We were supposed to be fixing things. And here she was, in the middle of the night, sneaking away to talk to him. It wasn't just a mistake, it was deliberate. Planned. A betrayal beyond anything I could have imagined. I wanted to storm in, rip the phone out of her hand, and confront her right there. But I was frozen, unable to move, as her laughter echoed in the small space. "I wish you were here," she purred, her fingers tracing the edge of her bra. "I'm so wet just thinking about you." I felt like I was going to be sick. I turned away, stumbling back down the hall, my mind spinning. I couldn't face her, not like this. I needed to get away before I did something I would regret. My vision blurred with tears as I made my way back to our room, slamming the door shut behind me. The silence that followed felt like a death sentence. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space where she should have been. My hands were shaking, and I realized I was crying, hot, silent tears running down my cheeks. How could she do this? After everything, after all her apologies and promises, she was still lying to me. Still cheating. I don't know how long I sat there before the door creaked open, and Megan stepped inside. She looked surprised to see me awake, her phone still clutched in her hand. "Hey," she said casually, as if she hadn't just been caught. "I couldn't sleep. Just went for a walk." I looked up at her, feeling a wave of fury wash over me. "Don't lie to me," I spat, my voice raw. "I saw you." The color drained from her face, her confident facade crumbling. "Jack, I—" "Save it," I snapped, standing up and grabbing my jacket. "I don't want to hear your excuses." I stormed out, leaving her standing there, her mouth open, caught in the act. The sound of the door slamming behind me felt like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. I knew then that nothing she could say would ever make this right. The moment I slammed that door, it felt like something inside me snapped. All the hurt and betrayal I'd been trying to swallow, all the pain I'd been ignoring, it boiled over into a seething, uncontrollable rage. I stormed down the hallway, barely aware of where I was going, only that I needed to put as much distance between myself and Megan as possible before I did something I couldn't take back. I ended up outside, on the open-air deck at the back of the ship. The ocean stretched out into the darkness, the waves crashing against the hull like the echo of my own thoughts. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white, the cold night air whipping against my face. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to unleash this fury that was burning me up from the inside. I'd been made a fool. Twice. I'd forgiven her, believed her lies, and she had thrown it all back in my face. But screaming into the void wasn't going to be enough. The more I stood there, staring into the churning sea, the more a plan began to form in my mind. It was dark, twisted, but it was the only thing that felt right. If she thought she could play me for a fool, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I wasn't going to sit back and be her victim. No, this time, I would be the one in control. I spent the next few hours pacing the deck, my mind racing, refining my plan. It needed to be perfect, calculated. I couldn't let my emotions get the better of me, not yet. If I wanted this to work, I had to play it cool, bide my time, and wait for the right moment. By the time the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, I knew exactly what I was going to do. When I returned to our room, Megan was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale and drawn. She looked up as I entered, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. "Jack," she started, her voice cracking. "I can explain. Please, just listen." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Save it," I said coldly. "I don't want your explanations. I don't want your apologies. We're done, Megan." Her mouth fell open, and for a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I mean, we're finished," I said, stepping closer, my eyes locked on hers. "But before this ends, I want you to know exactly what it feels like to be betrayed. I want you to feel the same kind of pain you've put me through." I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that she had lost control of the situation. She stood up, reaching for me, but I stepped back. "Jack, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I love you. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated. "Is that what you were whispering to him on the phone last night? Did it sound like nothing when you were telling him how wet you were, how much you wanted him?" Megan's face crumpled, and she sank back onto the bed, burying her face in her hands. She was crying now, real tears, but I didn't care. It was too little, too late. I had given her a chance, and she had thrown it away. "You're going to regret this," I said, my voice low and icy. "I promise you that." For the rest of the day, I avoided her. I needed space to execute my plan. I spent hours mingling with the other passengers, putting on a show of being the charming, carefree husband. I needed people to see me, to remember how I looked, how I acted, calm, collected, in control. I even made friends with a few of the crew members, buying them drinks and chatting them up. It was all part of the setup. That evening, I found Megan by the pool, sitting alone with a drink in her hand. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but she forced a smile when she saw me approaching. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly, her voice hoarse. I nodded, sitting down next to her, keeping my expression neutral. "Sure," I said. "Let's talk." She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it tightly. "I know I've messed up," she began, her voice trembling. "But I love you, Jack. I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I squeezed her hand back, leaning in close, my voice soft and tender. "I believe you," I whispered. "And I'm willing to give us another chance." The relief that washed over her face was almost pathetic. She threw her arms around me, burying her face in my neck. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you, Jack. I promise, I'll make this right." I held her close, stroking her hair, whispering soothing words. But inside, I was smiling. She had no idea what was coming. Over the next few days, I played the role of the forgiving husband perfectly. I was attentive, loving, everything she could have wanted. I made sure everyone on the ship saw us together, holding hands, laughing, looking like the perfect couple. It was all part of the act. Then, on the last night of the cruise, I set my plan into motion. We had dinner reservations at the ship's exclusive restaurant, the kind where you needed a special booking. I made sure we arrived early, tipping the waiter to give us the best table by the window. As we sat there, sipping champagne, I watched Megan closely. She was relaxed, happy, convinced that she had won me back. She didn't notice the small, discreet video camera I had placed in my jacket pocket, capturing every moment of our dinner. Halfway through the meal, I leaned in, smiling at her. "I have a surprise for you," I said. Her eyes lit up with excitement. "What is it?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, sliding it across the table. "I want you to watch this." She picked up the phone, her smile faltering as she realized what she was looking at, a video of her from the other night, half naked in the bathroom, talking to her lover. Her face went pale, and she dropped the phone, staring at me in horror. "You think you can cheat on me and get away with it?" I hissed, my voice low and dangerous. "This video is going to everyone. Your friends, your family, even your lover. They're all going to see the real you." She gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Jack, no, please." But I was already standing up, tossing some cash onto the table. "Enjoy the rest of your night, Megan," I said coldly. "Because after this, you're going to have nothing left." And with that, I walked out, leaving her there, exposed, broken, and ruined. The perfect revenge, for the perfect betrayal. As I walked away from the restaurant, the sounds of the bustling dining room faded into the background. I felt a sick satisfaction bubbling up inside me, a twisted kind of justice. Megan had no idea what hit her, and the look on her face when she realized what I'd done, it was worth every ounce of pain she had caused me. But as I stepped out onto the deck, the cool night air hitting my face, the satisfaction started to mix with something else. It was a strange emptiness, a hollowness that gnawed at my gut. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the dark sea, the waves shimmering under the moonlight. I had planned my revenge meticulously, down to the last detail. But standing there, alone in the darkness, it didn't feel as triumphant as I'd imagined. I thought I'd feel free, liberated from the weight of her betrayal, but all I felt was numb. I closed my eyes, trying to shake off the feeling. This was what I wanted. This was what she deserved. I pulled out my phone and opened the group chat with our closest friends, the people who had known us for years. Without giving it a second thought, I uploaded the video, along with a message that read, "Here's what Megan's been up to while I thought we were working on our marriage. Thought you all should know who she really is." My hands were shaking as I hit send, a mixture of adrenaline and something else, fear, maybe? I ignored it, shoving the phone back into my pocket. It wasn't long before the messages started flooding in. Shocked reactions, disbelief, and outrage filled the screen. I couldn't read them all, I didn't want to. I knew the video was spreading like wildfire. I could almost see our friends' faces as they watched it, the looks of horror and pity. I could imagine the whispers, the judgment, the humiliation that Megan would face. And that was just the beginning. I made my way back to our room, expecting to find it empty. But as I opened the door, I saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. She looked up as I entered, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. She was clutching her phone like a lifeline, and I knew she had seen the video. "Jack," she choked out, her voice barely more than a whisper. "What have you done?" "What I should have done a long time ago," I said coldly. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. "I exposed you for the liar and the cheat you are." She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You ruined me," she sobbed. "You've destroyed everything." I folded my arms across my chest, leaning against the wall. "You did that to yourself, Megan. Don't try to blame me for your choices." She got up, stumbling toward me, her hands reaching out as if she wanted to hold on to me, to plead for mercy. "I was wrong," she cried. "I know I was wrong, but this? You didn't have to do this, Jack. Please, please, tell me you didn't send it to everyone." I stepped back, out of her reach, my expression cold and unmoved. I did. And they all know what kind of person you really are now. Your parents, your friends, everyone. They know you for the liar you've become. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her whole body shaking. I watched her, feeling a flicker of pity, but I pushed it down. This was what I wanted. This was the revenge I had planned. But as I stood there, looking at the broken woman in front of me, I felt that emptiness inside me grow deeper. This wasn't the victory I'd imagined. It wasn't satisfying, it was just hollow. I turned away, grabbing my bag from the closet. I'm leaving, I said flatly. You can stay here and wallow in your mess, but I'm done. Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face filled with panic. No, Jack, please don't leave me, she begged. We can fix this. I know I messed up, but we can still fix this. I love you. I laughed bitterly, slinging the bag over my shoulder. You don't know what love is, I spat. If you did, you wouldn't have done what you did. You made your choice, Megan. Now live with it. I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. As I made my way down the hallway, the realization hit me like a wave, this was it. There was no going back. I had burned the last bridge between us. And for a brief moment, I felt the crushing weight of what I had done. I had ended it, truly ended it, in the most brutal way possible. I found myself back on the top deck, the wind howling around me. The ship was quiet now, most of the passengers asleep. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the endless black ocean, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. I pulled out my phone again, watching as the notifications continued to pour in. Messages from friends, missed calls from Megan's parents, voicemails I couldn't bring myself to listen to. Then, another message popped up, from Megan. It was a single line, I hope you're happy, Jack. You've destroyed me. I stared at the screen, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. I wanted to reply, to tell her that I wasn't happy, that this wasn't how I thought it would feel. But what was the point? I had done what I set out to do. I had exacted my revenge, and now there was nothing left but the emptiness. I sank down onto a deck chair, burying my face in my hands. I didn't know how long I sat there, the waves crashing against the ship, the cold wind biting into my skin. I felt like I was adrift, lost at sea with no way back. I had spent so much time planning my revenge, but I hadn't thought about what would come after. Eventually, the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the water. I watched as the first rays broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. It should have been beautiful, but all I felt was numb. The world kept turning, the ship kept moving, and I was just there, caught in the aftermath of my own destruction. I got up slowly, heading back inside. I knew I couldn't stay here. I needed to leave, to put as much distance between myself and this nightmare as possible. As I made my way down the hallway, I passed by our room. The door was slightly ajar, and I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should go inside, if I should say something, anything. But I couldn't. I walked past without looking back, leaving behind the wreckage of our marriage, of everything we once had. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do next, but I knew one thing for certain. There was no going back now. I found myself at the bar, ordering a double whiskey and downing it in one go. The burn felt good, numbing the ache in my chest, if only for a moment. I ordered another, and then another. I just needed to drown it out, to stop replaying her broken voice in my head. The words she'd said kept echoing, we can fix this. I love you, But before I could lose myself in the drink, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, expecting more angry messages from friends or family, but it was from Megan. I stared at the screen, her name glaring up at me. Part of me didn't want to read it, but I couldn't help myself. I clicked it open. I can't do this anymore, Jack. I'm sorry. I'm going to end it. I can't live without you. My heart skipped a beat, then began pounding like a drum in my chest. I read the message again, my hands trembling. This was a manipulation tactic, it had to be. But what if it wasn't? I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the realization hit me. I had pushed her to this. In my quest for revenge, had I gone too far? Another message came through. By the time you read this, it might be too late. I hope you find happiness without me. I bolted up from the bar, knocking over my drink. The bartender gave me a look, but I didn't care. I was already sprinting down the hallway, my mind racing. What if she really did it? What if this wasn't just a ploy for attention? The anger I had felt earlier was replaced with a cold, creeping fear. I reached our room and flung the door open. It was dark inside, the curtains drawn. For a moment, I couldn't see anything, and my breath caught in my throat. "Megan?" I called out, my voice shaky. There was no response. I fumbled for the light switch, flipping it on, and the room was flooded with harsh light. And there she was, lying on the bed, perfectly still. An empty bottle of pills was on the nightstand, next to a crumpled piece of paper. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. "No, no, no," I muttered, rushing over to her side. Her eyes were closed, her skin pale, and she wasn't moving. I shook her shoulders, panic clawing at my chest. "Megan, wake up! Megan!" Her eyelids fluttered, and she let out a soft, groggy moan. Relief hit me like a tidal wave, but it was quickly followed by a surge of anger. She was still conscious, but barely. I grabbed the bottle, scanning the label, sleeping pills. It looked like she had taken a handful, enough to scare me, but not enough to actually do any real harm. "You're sick," I spat, shaking her again, harder this time. "You're really going to pull this stunt to manipulate me?" Her eyes blinked open slowly, and she gave me a weak smile, her lips trembling. "I couldn't see any other way," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You left me with nothing, Jack." I threw the bottle across the room, watching it bounce off the wall and clatter to the floor. "This is low, even for you," I snapped. "You think you can manipulate me with a suicide attempt? You think I'm that stupid?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were real or just part of her act. "I wasn't lying," she murmured. "I really did want to end it. I couldn't bear the thought of you hating me." "Hating you?" I laughed bitterly. "You cheated on me, Megan. You lied to my face over and over again. And now, because you can't handle the consequences, you're going to pull this crap?" She reached out, her hand trembling, and grabbed onto my wrist. Her grip was weak, but she held on like I was her lifeline. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Don't leave me. I can't do this without you. I'll do anything, Jack. I'll make it right. I swear." For a moment, I felt myself wavering. I saw the fear in her eyes, the desperation, and it reminded me of the woman I had loved for so many years. I had never seen her like this, so vulnerable, so broken. But then I remembered the video, the phone calls, the way she had smiled at him, flirted with him right under my nose. I remembered the betrayal, the humiliation. I pulled my hand away, stepping back. "You're pathetic," I said coldly. "If you really wanted to end it, you wouldn't have sent me those messages. You just wanted to scare me, to make me feel guilty. Well, it worked. Are you happy now?" She let out a choked sob, covering her face with her hands. "I don't want to die, Jack," she cried. "I just wanted you to care. I wanted you to come back to me. You don't get it, do you?" I snapped. "This isn't love, Megan. This is manipulation. You don't care about me. You only care about controlling me." She shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, that's not true," she insisted. "I love you. I've always loved you. I made a mistake, but I can change. I can be better. Just give me another chance." I stared at her, feeling the rage bubble up inside me again. You don't deserve another chance, I said. You've already had too many. Her sobs grew louder, filling the small room, but I couldn't bring myself to feel any sympathy. I turned on my heel and headed for the door. Wait, she screamed, scrambling off the bed and stumbling toward me. Jack, please, don't go. I need you. I turned back, looking at her one last time. Her face was streaked with tears, her body trembling, and she looked more like a scared little girl than the confident woman I once knew. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of pity. But it was drowned out by the overwhelming sense of betrayal. You've taken everything from me, I said quietly. And now, I have nothing left to give you. Goodbye, Megan. I walked out the door, slamming it shut behind me. Her cries echoed down the hallway, but I kept walking, not looking back. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I needed to get away from her, from the twisted game she was trying to play. I needed to escape before I lost what little sanity I had left. As I made my way down the ship's corridor, the realization hit me like a sledgehammer: this was the end. There was no saving our marriage, no fixing what had been broken. Megan's desperate ploy had been the final nail in the coffin. And as much as it hurt, as empty and lost as I felt, I knew it was better this way. I had finally freed myself from her manipulations, but it felt less like victory and more like standing alone in the wreckage of a life I no longer recognized.